Hey, Aaron, thank you for responding back to me on Twitter. I've read the comments. I completely understand where you're coming from. I will try to explain to you the way I personally want to use Metasounds, and it might be a little bit different from what you guys envision for it because of gameplay stuff. That doesn't mean that what I see is not feasible or usable for anyone who has, plans for using this for gameplay as well. I'm not trying to create a DAW in any kind of sense with what I'm doing. Let me say that up front. There is some value to what I'm gonna try to explain here. So I'll go about it. This is the third time I'm trying to record this video, so I hope that it will work now. Okay, so on the right side, we have the Metasounds in its current state. This basically means that you can only write towards a Metasound. You cannot read anything back from it. Now, you can simply understand that if you want to create a widget where you say, I want to spawn in Metasounds dynamically, yes, we can use Quartz to make it sync to that clock. That's not a big deal, right? Either way you go, that's you can definitely do that. So I understand where you're coming from. But if this is write only, that means that I always need to know upfront which Metasound I'm going to use, what variables are in my Metasound to populate a widget. Because if I want to communicate with my widget to the Metasound, then I always need to know upfront exactly what is in it to be able to communicate with it. So I cannot populate my widget dynamically to whatever variable I have set up in a Metasound. So that is one thing. I think it's a very important one, and this is not about triggering and that kind of stuff because you don't really need to read a trigger back. This is just like, what skill am I using? I want to ask the Metasound, what skill am I currently using in order to update the widget, right? Because the next time I am clicking on, let's say, bring me synth 2 because I've spawned synth 2 and I will click synth 2, I kind of want to just read out all the variables in it to populate it back into the widget to make changes exactly as you would normally have an instrument or whatever. Okay, so let's say the basic idea of what I want to do is create one blueprint that I will use as a timer, right? And I will go about why I think a Metasound timer is way better than this one. That will come a little bit later. But the basics of it is I want to have one blueprint that spawns in everything, but also takes care of the timing of everything. And there's a good reason for it. And then on top of that, reading and writing is very important for widget setup. Because in this scenario, with writing only, as I say here, save game required to imitate read and write of synth values. It cannot be dynamically populated with actual Metasound variables because we don't know what's in there because we can't read it. That means we need to know it upfront, create a whole system for that, save it, read back whatever we saved, and click on the Metasound. That's the one we're using. Bring all the data back in and start to write to it again. All that work that you need to do for each type of Metasound can be completely ignored and diminished to just reading and writing. And if someone then wants to save something, yeah, they will probably need to either save a preset or whatever have you and start to write their own write their own values and save it to a slot, right? Just for reading and writing, this is not necessary. And with reading and writing, you will not have to do that. Okay, let's step to the left. Previously, in early access, I was setting up the send and receive to use this, right? I asked like, how can I make the variables local? Because they were throwing each other off because I was using a main timer. But once I knew how to make variables local, I could still send globally. So this was what I was doing. I was use one blueprint that had one timer in it, like a basic timer, and that timer was sending out to all the other Metasounds input. So let's say I only have my blueprint in the scene with my Metasound basic counter in it. Okay, now I say in my widget, I have a list of Metasounds that I want to spawn. Let's say I want to spawn synth 1 and I want to spawn synth 2, right? My widget doesn't need to know anything about what is in that Metasound yet, because once I spawn it, I will simply read whatever variable it has, populate my widget, and I can tweak whatever setting I have in my Metasound, right? This is 100% dynamic. If I destroy a Metasound, it will just, I will simply not read it with the Metasound or with the widget anymore. So simple. Okay. A couple of other things. If I have, let me slow down and try to grab my words correctly. There's a very big reason why I prefer using a Metasound as a timer, because it is sample accurate, right? I'm not saying Quartz is bad by design or whatever. What I'm saying is, why do stuff in a different way if Metasounds itself has everything already built in? It just needs a couple of extra things to make this work, right? Okay. So with full read and write, between Metasounds, even triggers could be sample accurate, right? Going back to a blueprint, however, I totally understand why you would not be able to do that with the normal triggers, because the blueprint can't keep up with, let's say, 84,000 kilohertz, as you stated in Twitter, right? Okay, about that, I have this here. This is a potential node, right? And this, I call it a frame accurate trigger. Can be read from a blueprint, is not designed to be sample accurate, instead quantized to the game thread, used as an execution node in the blueprint to activate gameplay actions or animate anything. So let's say that in my main counter, Metasound counter, I have the trigger counter, and on each of these, I will activate that. Okay. Let's just assume that once you guys made this, it will quantize itself to the game thread. And if the sample rate of the Metasound becomes too fast, it will just quantize to the nearest one it can do on the game thread. From my simple logic mind, it could be that simple. What that would give me is a way to communicate back to my blueprint. And this is super important, and it might not be obvious here, because you can go like, yeah, whatever you want to do here, you can do that here as well. And you would be correct. If I would use Quartz for that, I would already know where my snare hit is going to be. I would already know where my tom hit is going to be. However, you guys kind of made Metasounds too freaking awesome. And that's where this comes in. Let's say that this is my synthesizer, right? But I have an alternate version. And in my alternate version of my synthesizer, when I am triggering here from my main counter for my synthesizer to receive a trigger, and I want to say, now I want to procedurally add notes to whatever timing comes in. So we will get a beat, and from my list of probability, it will choose a couple of extra notes, right? There is no way at this point to communicate that back to my blueprint. So imagine my guy on the drum set, he's playing the snare, right? And I want the probability to go and hit that extra snare. There's no way for the blueprint to know that. Okay, Yeah, I could do the same thing if I set up the probability here, but that kind of beats the purpose of having probability in the Metasound, if you get what I'm saying. So that is where this node comes in, because this node, having the ability to communicate back to my blueprint, and that's why it needs to be game thread quantized specifically and not, sample accurate as the way that it works in Metasounds. This would give me the option to be completely free inside of a Metasound what I want to do, right? If it's too fast, it will just quantize it. Like, let's say I am going too fast in my Metasound, it will just quantize 2 on 1. It would just result in one of these to trigger in the blueprint, not 2 or 3 or whatever have you. But if it can still let's keep it at that, right? So with this, what you would have is the option to create a timer in Metasounds, okay? Spawn dynamically a Metasound, which can have any value in it, because again, we're not reading triggers, we're only reading back variables that could be like a cutoff or a glide or a frequency, a scale. Very important to be able to read a scale so we can choose from a blueprint what scale we're going to use. Like if a part of my music in a game or in an interactive medium or whatever have you would need to change, I would need to know what scale we're at to change it. Reading a scale back from a Metasound would give me that. Simple, right? No need to store stuff, read it back, change it. Because probability. I kind of want to do that stuff in here. Maybe I would want to do that in a synthesizer. Maybe I would have a special synthesizer that changes the scaling in other synthesizers of Metasound. Having that option there, reading and writing variables, very important to have that. Okay. So for my widget, that would mean that whatever Metasound I spawn, I can populate my widget with all the data that I have currently set up in my Metasound. From there, in my widget, if I make a change, it just writes it back to them. That's the same as here, right? All of these, that's why I have the pluses here. Because this is 100% dynamic, it doesn't matter for this counter, it doesn't matter for this widget what Metasound I'm going to spawn. This system will work with whatever Metasound I'm going to spawn. Super dynamic. Which results in that once I hit a plus button, it doesn't matter. Whatever I do will be okay. There's no need to predefine stuff, if you get what I'm saying. Okay. And on top of that, having this node communicating back to the blueprint gives us the option to fire off fireworks, to animate characters. The reason why that is so important, to be able to do that from the Metasound back to the blueprint and make the blueprint communicate to anything that it needs to communicate with. The reason why that is super important is actually very simple. Because with this approach here, you need to define upfront what is going to happen. Yes, you can program in probability, but there, again, it is weird if we have probability in a Metasound but cannot use it because this system is hooked up to it. This system and writing to it only means that in the end, when we want to animate stuff, this is why all this is so important, because if we want to animate stuff after the fact, that will not be possible here. Because my Metasound is going to make choices. It's going to make choices to do either this, it's going to make choices to do either that. And once that happens, my blueprint needs to have a signal to say, hey man, I made a choice. I'm a Metasound. I made a choice. I need to hit that freaking snare, but you're not going to do it because you don't know. But I'm still going to play the sound, right? I hope that this weird explanation that I might have given here, because I feel that I'm all over the place, but you're smart enough to kind of narrow this down to what I'm trying to say here. Why this is so important? If you look at what I've been making here, these guys, right? I think you saw a couple of videos on Twitter of what I'm doing. So these drum and bass picks, this is all running from my Akai MPC. I have that thing over here, right? From my Akai MPC. So I am pre-programming the music into my Akai MPC. I'm sending out the MIDI to Unreal Engine. So whatever happens here happens on screen. That is basically what I'm saying. Whatever happens in my Metasound, I wanted to have a representation on the screen, because the cool thing is that means that eventually, for me personally, in my creative weird space, I can create a fully digitized band like these drum and bass picks and put Metasounds in place of where Akai MPC is right now, which means I could have completely randomized music that is visually represented. So I only need to press a freaking button and I could let this play the whole day. Because the Metasounds is going to make choices. I can spawn a synth whenever I want, you know. If I want to change the bass player's sound, I would just say destroy that Metasound and now spawn a different bass with a different, you know, set of variables inside of it. And I know there's presets, Metasounds, but still, it needs to communicate back to my widget. It needs to communicate back to my characters when they should move. I am able to do that with my Akai MPC, and I can tell you the artistic freedom that we get with that is enormous. That's what I'm saying, right? So this is from an artistic perspective. Now imagine for a game what that could do. A character runs through a level, jumps onto some kind of a block, a beat starts to play, there's probability into that beat, and whenever a certain node in a probability starts to trigger, things start to spawn in the level. That only works if you can get a trigger back, and I'm talking about the frame rate, the game thread quantized trigger, you know, needs to communicate back to whatever blueprint would make that happen, that spawning. That could be Niagara. It could be anything, right? The difference here between what I'm saying and what currently Metasounds is doing. Currently, Metasounds is basically set up to I don't know if advocate is the right word, but let's just say it. Metasounds in its current state is there to advocate whatever is happening on screen already. I am talking about the opposite. I want stuff to happen on screen because Metasounds dictates it, right? It's the Metasound at that point becomes the guy that is orchestrating the whole symphony. And you have everything inside of a Metasound to do that. That's why my mind goes like, oh man, we need this. It is so close to having that as an option. It is so freaking close. And from where I'm sitting, the only thing we need is reading and writing, making triggers, having the option like a tick box. Is this trigger local or is it global? And then saying which one, which tag or whatever is gonna be able to read this, right? And then here say on this input, I'm clicking it and saying, hey, this is a global one, and I'm gonna read from this particular tag. That tag is set up here, and that tag will work here. Now that also means that by default, it's a very good choice to make all of these triggers local. Perfect. For most people, it's exactly what they need. So that is one. That would allow reading and writing from between Metasounds. And then from the blueprint perspective, simply reading, and I have it here, reading all variable types except triggers in the blueprint, and writing all variable types including triggers, playing, stopping, whatever trigger we want to do from the blueprint to the Metasound and all the variables, but reading only the variable types because we don't want to have the triggers. We want to read everything, including scales, very important. What scales are all my Metasound set to? And now change the scale for all of them at once. Reading it, writing it. Okay, so that's basically these lines. And then on top of that, the last thing is that if we can have a game thread quantized trigger specifically, maybe that's a good word for it, I don't know. It will not be as accurate on a sample level, but it will be accurate enough to animate whatever creative style we're going to choose on screen. That by itself makes the blueprint and the Metasound the director of a symphony. That was a lot of talking. I hope you see why I think and why I'm so enthusiastic. I'm super enthusiastic. I want to use all the stuff that Metasound has. The difference is the freedom that I would get from this, and not just me as an artist, also game developers. If they do not understand the freedom that this is going to give us, they will in time, right? They will in time. This is currently, it's very cool. It's very close to having what's on the left side. This would mean so much extra work that this would just instantly give you. Instantly. And again, why would I want to go somewhere else? And I'm talking about the quartz system to create my timers. I rather do all of that in Metasounds because then my mind can stay in Metasounds. From my perspective, it's the perfect environment to do all the things because it already has all the things except for a couple. Anyway, I will leave it at this. The video is already very long, but I hope I kind of explained to you once and for all why I think this is very substantial as an upgrade for the official release of UE5. I hope this is going to be in there. Yeah. And I will wait for it, I will wait for it because if I need to do it this way, holy shit, man. There is so much stuff that I would need to program, which is completely unnecessary. And in the end, this will not give me the communication to my characters on screen. So again, as a last statement, and then I will completely leave it alone. Thank you for your time. The goal of all this is giving Metasounds the ability to dictate what happens on screen visually. That's it. That's the end result. Thank you for being awesome. Thank you for making all this cool stuff. See ya.